My name is Elizabeth of Lore. Today I am going to talk about trauma loops, what they are, how you can recognize them when you experience them, and what you can do about them. So trauma is a subject I actually know quite a lot about from many different angles of reference. I am someone who is diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder for many years following a very abusive relationship I was in between the ages of 16 and 20. I also ran my own trauma blog for several years. I was a blogger for the healthyplace.com trauma blog. I was a journalist, a mental health and social justice journalist, and quite a lot of what I covered related to the topic of trauma, so I had to read a lot of peer-reviewed studies and interview clinicians, doctors, other people with lived experience on the topic of trauma. And in addition to that, I'm also a channeler, so I'm able to channel intuitively messages on different topics. And since this one is something that I've experienced so intimately, it's one that I have channeled messages about. So I have many different perspectives when it comes to the topic of trauma. And something that I recognized recently is the idea of trauma loops and how they come into our life and have a really big impact on the things that happen to us both internally and externally. So one really important thing to understand about trauma is that when you experience it, it becomes trapped in your physical body as well as your energetic body. And the idea of trauma being trapped in the physical body is something that is talked about a lot by Bessel van Kolk, especially in his book, The Body Keeps the Score, which I recommend everyone read, especially if you have or identify with having PTSD. But I think everyone who's having a human experience has the experience of trauma. So I really think The Body Keeps the Score is a good book for anyone and everyone to read. And in it, he really discusses how and why trauma gets trapped in the body and how to move it out. And what I love about it is that his big recommendation is yoga, right? And he's a doctor, he's a practicing psychiatrist, and he recommends yoga as a treatment for trauma. And I was fortunate and so thrilled to have had an opportunity to interview him a couple times when I was working as a journalist, and I'll link the stories where I quoted him in the description box. But one of the things I remember him saying, I don't think this is actually quoted in the story from what I recall, but one of the things I remember him saying, I asked him something along the lines of, why do you think yoga is a great treatment for trauma? And I didn't mean it in an offensive way, but he responded kind of like, I don't think yoga is a treatment for trauma. I've done empirical studies on this. I know yoga is a treatment for trauma. I loved that so much. I loved hearing that. Like he was like, no, this is real science. I don't think necessarily that we need real science to confirm everything we know, but I love when the science community and other communities come together, because sometimes they are at odds, right? Especially the spiritual and science community. Sometimes they think they're at odds. I think they're actually quite often share the same opinions, but it seems that there are people who are like, I don't believe in spirituality because I believe in science. So I love when they're able to come together like that. And in any case, doing things to move trauma out of your body is one of the ways that you can start addressing your trauma, right? Yoga is a great one. Anything from I don't know anything, that's quite a big generalization, but many things from the East will help address trauma, because many practices from the East, because that's where the chakra system concept came from. And so they're very aware of the energy body and the relationship between the physical body and the energy body. So these practices like yoga, like martial arts, like Tai Chi, all of these different practices. I think Tai Chi is considered a martial art, I believe. But in any case, all of these practices are really great for moving trauma from the body and in the physical body and the energy body. But you can also do other things. I really love dancing. Dancing is a great way for me to move trauma out of my body. A lot of people that I met in 2021 who I recognize on a soul level, an unusual amount of people actually identify drumming as something that they do to move trauma out of their body. So that's something that's been recommended by people whose opinions I trust, even though it's not something that I've ever done. And there's many things: running, walking, exercise, all sorts of things. So that, first of all, is one great way to just to start off, is just get it moving from your body, because that's going to move it from your physical body and your energetic body. Now, when it comes to a trauma loop, you have to understand that when trauma gets trapped in your energetic body, when it gets trapped between your chakra systems, it acts as kind of like a knot, right? Like a tangle. And that can block up the systems and block the energy flow between them and cause a lot of discord within your energy system. And when you have discord in your energy system, because we live in an infinite multiverse where we are able to traverse timelines, right? Because of that, when you have this kind of issue in your energy system, that's where you're vibrating at. That's the kind of timeline you're going to be in. You're going to be in a timeline that reflects your energy system. So you're going to be in a timeline where you have this trauma coming up again and again and again and again and again. And that's what I mean by a trauma loop. So one way that trauma loop has manifested in my life that I think many of you will be able to relate to is with relationship trauma, right? Because I was in that abusive relationship. But even people who weren't necessarily in abusive relationships often have relationship trauma, because many times it stems from a relationship with our parents. And this isn't to blame parents. I'm a parent. I know I'm not perfect. No one is, right? We're all working and doing the best we can with the tools we have in the moment. So this isn't a blame thing, but our relationship with our parents does affect us, right? So, and it can cause us to have these trauma loops, right? And sometimes they're generational trauma loops as well, because that's something that happens too, where our family, our parents, other members of our family carry over trauma in that we then inherit. So for this example of my trauma loop, to give you an example of how to identify yours, I was in this abusive relationship, and then after that, every single relationship I was in was abusive. It's very, that's why I use this example. It's very straightforward and simple. None of them were ever as abusive as that first one, which was very, very, very extreme, kind of the scale of the abuse that I experienced, but they were all definitely, without a doubt, abusive. And it was something that I was repeating without meaning to, because that was where I was vibrating. That was where my energetic body was existing. But it was also a mental thing, right? Because I carried this feeling that if I wasn't like having my head punched into the pavement, that I was getting better than what I'd gotten and I should be grateful for it, you know? So these like degrees of abuse became acceptable to me because they weren't as bad as the abuse I experienced before. So there were multiple reasons, right? There was like a psychological reason, there was an energetic reason why I was having these trauma loops recurring in my life again and again. And when I was finally able to let go of that, I thought I let go of it, but in fact I hadn't fully. I had let go of the idea that I did not deserve to be abused, right? To be physically or sexually abused. I was able to recognize that and value myself to that extent. But then I began to attract relationships that continued to be emotionally neglectful, and to attract relationships that were based on like sexual attraction, where I was like an object of sexual desire, but nothing more, which is not something I want, like especially as a sexual assault survivor. That's not a good feeling, right? Like I wanted emotional fulfillment. I didn't want to feel like I was only valued for my body. But that was where I continued to have this mental and energetic block, because that's an effect of sexual assault, is feeling like your only worth is as a vessel for sexual pleasure for someone else, right? So even though these were consensual and mutually pleasurable experiences, they were, in the physical sense, they were emotionally unsatisfying. And that was how my trauma loop continued, because I hadn't fully let go of it. Okay? And so here's how I was able to finally let go of that, and how you can too. So besides the physical moving of trauma out of your body, which is very important, you also need, and this is very simple, you need to name it, right? You need to name it as a trauma loop, and you need to name it as the way it's manifesting in the present. Because if you try to go, I tried talk therapy for years and it never worked. You know, if some people say talk therapy works, and that's great if it works for you. Like, I'm not knocking it. If it works for you, that's fantastic. But I noticed that a lot of people just end up in talk therapy for years and years and years. And you know, there are things like cognitive behavioral therapy and all of that, which can help retrain your brain, and that's fantastic as well. But when it comes to trying to just talk through and address the individual traumatic experiences, especially if you have many of them, because I was abused for years. So this was a lot of different events that kind of, I say it was an abusive relationship, but really it was like hundreds of traumas that occurred in my life, right? Like each event was a trauma. And so to go back and kind of pick through that is where it becomes this knot, this tangle. Like, have you ever had like jewelry or electrical cords that you didn't put away properly, and you take them out and they're in this big tangle, and you try pulling on one end and another end, it comes loose, but another end tightens, you know, like that. And it just gets really frustrating, and it's like really hard to undo. That's when you address the trauma of the past, the events of the past. It's like that. But when you address what's happening in the present, and you recognize that it's a trauma loop and you name it as such, you're able to release the mental and energetic experience from a tangle, from this really difficult tangle, into a loop. And a loop, it's still not aligned, right? It's still not the proper alignment, but it's healthier. A tangle is going to block you up. A loop, at least your energy can travel through it. It's not traveling through it in the most healthy way, but it's still able to travel through. It's something you can work with. And it's much easier to resolve. So you need to recognize that the experiences happened in the past, right? You can't do anything about those. And look at it from how it's impacting you now, in the present, as this loop of experience that you're having now. And name it. There's such a power in naming. This is a theme in fantasy stories. You know, Ursula K. Le Guin writes about this, and other fantasy stories, like the power of naming something. But it's real. It's not just a fantasy thing. It's real. When you name something, you take its power. You gain its power. You gain power over it instead of having power over you. And the simple act of reframing and naming the trauma as a trauma loop, as a present experience, and not that of the past, that alone alleviates so much of the pain and the blockage in your energy body. And that alone is going to shift you into a timeline of healing instead of a timeline of stress. And that's a great place to be if you need to heal, right? A timeline of healing and a frequency of healing. So name it, recognize it. Recognize what the trauma loop is and name it. Okay? And then once you do that, it's so much easier to let go. You can recognize, the next thing you need to recognize is that it's a loop, right? A loop doesn't stay looped on its own. You're holding it. You're holding that loop together. And once you recognize that you can just let go. Seriously, for real. Once you recognize that, you can just let go. Once I recognized that I was attracting these relationships, these unfulfilling and triggering relationships, these trauma loops, it made me realize that I could just not do it. And once you name it, it becomes so much more obvious. Like, of course I don't want to be in relationships with people who never take me out on dates. Of course I don't want to be in relationships with people who don't want to commit to me at all. Of course I don't want to be in relationships with people who view me as a body, and a vessel for sex, and that's it. Of course I don't want that. I know I don't want that. So why am I holding on to that, right? Right? And it becomes much easier to let go. And the other thing to recognize as well, each time you name each of these things, it follows. The next realization that you need to make follows. So for me, what you need to recognize next is what you're holding it with, like the hand that you're holding it with. So for me, the hand that I was holding that loop with, right? This is a metaphor, but what I was holding that loop with was my desire to have a corrective experience. I had a very strong desire to have a healthy relationship. And there's nothing wrong with the desire to have a healthy relationship. But my desire was rooted not in just wanting to share love with someone, but it was rooted in the desire to have someone fix the past for me, have someone heal that, to have someone do for me the things that those other people didn't do for me, and to not do the things that those other people did do to me. And in and of itself, that's not a bad thing. That's a healthy thing. To not want someone to beat me up or abuse me and to do nice things for me is a reasonable and healthy expectation. But the reason I wanted it was to heal me, to save me, right? And that's not something that anyone else can do, right? It's not something anyone else can do. So I had to recognize that so I could release that hold on that trauma loop. I could release that desire. But You have to be cautious because every feeling that we have, and I have another video that goes into this more, is a mask that love wears. Realizing that is another great way to release your trauma. And I'll talk about that more in a second. And I'll also link that video which discusses the steps to really feeling this. But here's what I was going to say. Every emotion is a mask that love wears, but many of these masks have two faces, right? Many of these masks are double-sided. So my desire, the other side of that mask, was rejection. So what I immediately did once I recognized this, without even realizing I was doing it, was I switched hands. I switched to that other mask, and I started to reject the idea of a relationship. I said, you know what? I don't want a relationship at all. I don't want to connect with anyone in this way at all. I'm going to not have sex for 6 months, which, you know, honestly, like, there's nothing wrong with that, but my reason for it was unhealthy. Because my reason was just simply to push any of these connections away and to never experience that pain again, right? And I was like, what made me, I didn't hold on to this for very long, fortunately. What made me realize that this was a little unhealthy, or very unhealthy, and that this was still a continuation of the same trauma loop, just being held with a different hand, was when the thought came into my head, even if I meet someone amazing who I really connect with and really like, I'm still going to push them away and not be with them. And I was like, wait a second. When I had that thought, I was like, wait a second. That's ridiculous. Why would I do that to myself? And why would I do that to another person? Right? Because that's cruel. Even if I don't think I'm being cruel, like, that would be cruel. And I realized that would have just been a perpetuation of the exact same loop. I just would have been on the other side of it. I would have been the person who was doing the things that had been done to me, but I would have still been attracting the exact same energy into my life. And I didn't want to be on that timeline anymore. I didn't want that energy in my body, and I didn't want to be on the frequency of that timeline anymore. So I had to let go of that rejection too, which was hard and scary because it's scary to be vulnerable, right? And saying that I would accept something into my life like that after feeling like I had held the idea of that so tightly that it caused me harm is scary and vulnerable. But I've had to let go of both sides of that emotion in order to let go, to release this trauma loop that I don't want to be on anymore and to get out of that timeline. And so I've done it, and I've come to a place where I just accept what comes and flow with the current of experience. Whatever happens, happens. If I find someone to be in a relationship with, then that's awesome. And if I don't, that's also fine. Like, it's also, both are great. And so now back to what I had kind of mentioned as a side note. Part of the reason why that's okay for me now is that I feel my own love. I recognize that nobody can give me love. People can love me, but nobody can give me love because I am love. I already have love, right? I give myself love. My feelings are my own. People don't give you feelings. You can get triggered by other people. And trigger, we often have a negative connotation, but people can trigger positive emotions in us too. But ultimately, there are emotions and we're responsible for them. And when it comes to love, that is our natural state of being. So if you align with your spirit, which is naturally in a state of love, because it is love, then you're able to feel that. And that is also a really powerful way to help get through trauma. And it's not just relationship trauma, it's any trauma. Because once you feel love, you're able to let go much easier. You're in this state of bliss, and you're just able to, like, soften into it. You know, like when you just feel really good and you're just kind of like, this is amazing, and you just soften into it. You're able to let go. You're just able to let go. So when you align with your spirit, and there are many ways to do that, meditation, yoga, some of the things that help move the trauma out of your body, just doing things you really enjoy also aligns you with your spirit, connecting with people who are similar to you and you feel a soul recognition with, so many different ways. Being out in nature, just aligning with your spirit and putting yourself into a state of joy and love is a great way. Now, one more thing that I want to say about how to release trauma, and this is very practical. When you feel a trauma response, you will usually tense up. For me, I tense my shoulders, not like this extreme, but like I tense my shoulders and kind of my core tenses up. There's some other places too, but those are the two main places. So once you feel a trauma response, feel into your body and feel where the tension is, because there's going to be tension somewhere in your body. It's different for everyone where you hold it. And then just release it physically. Physically release the tension in your physical body. And once you do that, you can do it each place at a time. Like I'll usually start with my shoulders and then do my core. And then if my jaw is tight, I'll do that. My feet are tight, I'll do that. It's just one place at a time. Just relax it. Just physically relax it. And as you do that, you find that it becomes easier to let go on an energetic level and a mental level as well. So that's a great way to help you in the releasing of trauma and to help let go of that trauma loop. I don't know what made that sound, but I feel like it's saying that I'm done. I keep getting these messages at the end of my videos that are like, all right, good job, you're done. So here we go. Remember that letting go, recognizing your trauma loops and letting go of them really is the easiest thing. It's natural. It's already done. Thank you for watching. Thank you to Todd, who commented and asked me to talk about this. He's one of my subscribers. You're rad, Todd. Thank you. And you know what to do if you like this video, right? I think you know what to do. Okay. See you on the next one. Love you all.